Greetings on this weekend, and this opening chart is from PIMCO's Bill Gross's latest letter, which is incredibly weird. Follow the link if you want weirdness. But this is a Jim Bianco chart that he's dragged into here to show us hardly deleveraging total US debt. Let's start at the bottom. Household, and we can see that household has deleveraged to a certain degree. The next one up is non-financial businesses, and it's hard to see on these stacked charts, but I don't think they have delevered at all and might have actually increased their debt levels. Financial have certainly decreased their debt levels from 2007, and government, as we can see, has increased its debt levels and has made up the difference, and we can see from 2007 just all going across this $50 trillion debt line. It went down slightly from 52 to about 50, but it's back to 52 again, and this basically is a description of the economy, just about holding on. Next we have an over the peak, a wonderful blog. I don't know if you've ever been there. Follow the link to get there in the comment section, which is often rather marvellous. Somebody called Zarathustra Speaks Again or something like that. Put this in a comment to the posting about finding correlation between CPI inflation and something else. The correlation was found here by Z with M1 money supply stock. These charts taken from Fred and stretched are actually the same to align the recessions. But strangely, if you see consumer price indexes is on the top, the CPI inflation, with the M1 money stock on the bottom, and the red lines point forwards, not backwards. If we were looking for something, and I'm not saying that we were or are, for something to cause CPI inflation, these would need to point backwards to cause the inflation, and point upwards and forwards. But strangely, these point downwards and forwards, and what we have is CPI inflation going up quite regularly, and a period of years, 2, 3, sometimes 4 years later, consistently M1 money stock goes up. CPI inflation causes the M1 money stock to approximately 3 years later go up. Read the rest of the comments to find out why Zarathustra thinks this is so. Real personal consumption expenditures. That blue line that comes in bottom left and gets going and stops goes back an awful long way at that angle, so it's right enough to note in that red line, which would be a continuation of the trend. But the 2007 recession knocked that trend off course, and it's trending up again, that green line showing the trend, and it's going upwards, but you can see there is a slight opening. There's a downward shift to that green line. It is not going up to meet the red line. It'll never join where that red line is going. There is actually a drop in real personal consumption expenditures compared to where things were 2006 before and into 2007. This is important enough information if you're a Fed watcher and interested in stuff that is controlling the economy. Fed's Bullard central bank very close to adopting inflation target. The US central bank may well get an inflation target this year, a top Federal Reserve official said Thursday. That's Bullard. We are very close to tying monetary policy explicitly to some measure of overall inflation, Fed Reserve Bank of St. Louis President Bullard said. He said the Fed may also be near making a collective statement about what level of unemployment is the natural rate, below which inflation pressures tend to rise. I wasn't going to do any of this talking today. So let's say they say 4.5% is the natural rate of unemployment, and they call that churn. It's naturally you'll have a churn at 4.5%. If that rate is above that, you're safe to go inflation fighting. As in, if deflation looks like it's there, you can go inflation fighting. You can keep pumping, but if unemployment comes down to the natural rate, 4.5%, you've got to stop, because that might cause inflation. But they might kind of be inferring from this that they're going to put up the rate that they want for inflation. 2.5 might not cut it anymore, and they might infer somewhere along the line that they'll go for 3.5 to 4% inflation until either that rate is exceeded or the unemployment rate comes down below the natural rate. That's your explanation. From The Economist, there was a time when the Federal Reserve wouldn't say whether it had changed interest rates. Soon it will say where it thinks rates will be years from now, beginning with its policy meeting January 24th, 25th. I bet you can't wait. Fed officials will disclose when they expect to start raising their short-term interest rate target. They'll talk about 2014, maybe even 2015, which is at near zero now, and what they expect its path to be over the coming years. Behind such radical transparency is a grim fact. At the start of a successive year of extraordinarily low short-term rates and a still moribund economy, the Fed is desperate for new ways to stimulate demand. And we have the four main central banks, non-standard bearers, central bank policy rates. You can see mid-2008, they were all 1% or below. The ECB flirted with going back above 1%, but was soon forced to get back to the 1% mark. On the right, central bank assets. Interestingly, Japan started 2005 at 30% because they've been playing this game for a long time and are now back at 30%. The euro area started low at 10%, but now is up at 30%. US and Britain very low until 2008, and they are linked at about 20%. That's 20% of GDP of the particular country. Market Watch, bit of a shift here. Global oil search may cost $600 billion in 2012. $600 billion to look for oil. That's not just money, that'll be energy as well being used to look for oil. New York, Dalman, Rose and Co. on Tuesday said it expects worldwide oil and gas exploration spending rise by 9% to a record $600 billion in 2012. A lot of money and a lot of energy will be used to find this lot of energy. Next is the International Energy Agency. The IEA has warned the world needs to spend $38 trillion to meet projected energy demand up to 2035. About 20 odd years away, 22 now, 3 years away. So from Newswire, the figure, which is a 15% rise on last year's forecast of 33 trillion, was given on the first day of a 2-day meeting hosted by the IEA to discuss investment needs with energy-hungry emerging economies. However, IEA chief economist Fatih Birol says there was reluctance from some oil producers to invest enough. One of the questions marks, etc., etc. Basically, this money has to be found to be invested to get the projections that Fatih Birol says that the IEA will make us still all right for oil. First, the investment in money and energy has to be made. That projection from late 2011 was $38 trillion over 22 years. It's about 1.6 trillion a year, and we're currently doing 0.6 a year and struggling to do that. What he's saying is the oil producers of the Middle East, North Africa and the rest have to really stump up an awful lot of extra money and invest it and energy into finding more energy, or the optimistic IEA figures will fall flat. But always, for the last 4 or 5 years now, Fatih Birol has been pushing this thing. We will be all right for oil as long as this investment is made. Now, I personally think that all he's doing is saying politically, yes, I can fiddle it so everything will be all right as long as this investment is made. But all along the line, he's known that this investment cannot and will not be made. So really, we will not be all right. Alphaville gives us dramatic moment of Greek oil trading. It's vaguely interesting. This Greece is relying on Iran for most of its oil, as traders pull the plug on supplies and banks refuse to provide financing for fear that Athens will default on its debt. More than 24 European traders contacted by Reuters at oil majors and trading houses said the lack of bank financing has forced Greece to stop purchasing crude from Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan in recent months, and they had to resort to Iran, who would give them the appropriate credit. But only a day after that, the European Union strong-armed Greece into joining the embargo on buying oil from Iran. So where is Greece going to get its oil from? And where's Iran going to sell its oil to? But you know my feelings on that. This has been bouncing around the internet for a few days now. Tax officials traced the owners of 133 Lamborghinis, Ferraris and SUVs and other top-end cars that they found parked in the snow-lined streets of Cortina, a winter playground for the rich and famous in the Dolomites. This is Italy. They found that 42 of the owners, nearly a third, had declared incomes of less than €22,000, $18,000 or £18,000, or I don't know, $26,000. A further 16 claimed to be earning less than €50,000, $75,000. And these are Lamborghini owners. But this is another reason why the euro will not work, because there's a different mentality. But besides the different mentality, there are different systems in place which have developed over hundreds of years. And Italy runs the system where you don't pay tax that much, but you have this extra money, which you do what Berlusconi said is the cafes and restaurants are full, and then if you've got any extra money left over, you buy Italian government bonds. So that way of looking at things, you can tax the people, the money goes to the government, or you don't tax the people and they have spare money left over and they buy government bonds in the end. And that's just the way the system was. But that will not, as a system, appeal to Merkel and the Germans, who want the system to be the German system. In Ireland, who I keep wanting to mention over and over again, but they never seem to get onto the front page of my presentations, IMF dismisses Ireland's objections to repaying bondholders. This is the bank thing that they're still struggling with, obviously, and will for decades, refers to a cost equal to 2% of our GDP as rather modest. Some guy called Craig something or other, working for the IMF, said, no, you've got to pay these bondholders, it's only 2% of your GDP. And as this Nama Wine Lake chap notes, I wonder what the reaction in Paris or Berlin Frankfurt would be if it was suggested that a payment by either country to bondholders in a thoroughly zombified bank be made, and that, further, such a payment was rather modest. 2% of French GDP is about 40 billion euro, and 2% of German GDP is 60 billion euro, saying, look, it might be a modest sum compared to German GDP, but this is what Ireland have to pay the money out of, which is really Irish GNP, and it's a huge sum of money. So, and finishes with, and yet when Craig waved away 2% of our GDP as rather modest, there was not a peep from our politicians, either government or opposition. But of course they are under the cosh by the European Union. Finish with The Guardian. Germany once admired British workmanship, but that was a long time ago. Over the North Sea lies the richest country in Europe, its success built on the manufacturing industry that Britain has spurned. I'll give you one paragraph from it. It's either tragic or comic. I couldn't decide which. So many people have had this dream recently. Vince Cable, of course, and Lord Glassman, no doubt, but also George Osborne when he made his fatuous speech about March of the Makers. And there, over the North Sea, is the richest country in Europe, exemplary Germany, with its technical schools and apprenticeships, its respect for engineers, and its lair of family businesses known as Mittelstand, that puts long-term reputation above short-term profit by making the specialized parts that industry everywhere needs. How foolish we were to imagine that national prosperity could be spun from figures on a computer screen, out of thin air. How silly to despise the making of three-dimensional objects as a lowly process that had quit the West for the East, and how wise it would be, so the dream goes, to take a leaf from Germany's book and make manufacturing a much larger slice of the economy, therefore returning Britain to an earlier and possibly more solid version of itself. And we're hearing this all across the Western world. Can't all do it, kids. Bye.